Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It is Friday. What is it? Friday, April 1st. April Fool's Day. I should have done some kind of April Fool's joke and critiqued. I don't know. What would be weird? Critiquing Shakespeare or something? I don't know. I always wonder why people don't mess with me more and submit famous poems so I can reject them and then they can say, "Ha! Why did you?" Why did you not accept this poem that was written by Shakespeare? We should do that for Critique of the Week on April Fool's. So tune in next year. Maybe we'll do that. But anyway, this is the Critique of the Week. I'm so glad you could join me. On my camera, you can see all the boxes of books. The office is littered with books at all times. So the purpose of the Critique of the Week, as always, is to give that workshop experience to everybody. We sit around and share poems, talk about them, how we can make them better, what works, what doesn't, giving as much feedback as we can to the poet. Please leave your comments in the chat window because the poets will be reading these later. I'll read and share as many of the comments as I can as we go through these poems. It's also an opportunity to see what it's like to read a submission too, which is always interesting. So we'll do that as well. I haven't read these poems yet, and we'll see, how they would go. How would you react as an editor if this was a submission? So let's check this out. This is the first poem. We have two poets. I should have mentioned who the poets were. It's Andrew Sano and Patricia Casey, who you see here kind of regularly. So let's look at the first poem. Okay. Andrew Sano, 3 a.m. You had no idea. You had no idea you had no idea. You can hear a guitar playing, not beautifully, but just enough to pick it out of the darkness. Everywhere children cheer, and you can hear youth in their bound voices like a bundle of reeds, giving off the smell of cut grass, as if ears could become tongues, set free to return all the junk mail with interest. That is wrong. It's a mess, and you try to gather it. Fail, look up, and see strangers making the same movements, even the ones sitting still, as if they can't quite hear any guitars anymore. Gradually, you feel like a guest in your own room, too uncomfortable to even piss in a jar now and sleep as a snicker in the dark when you need a friend. Very interesting poem, 3 a.m. Let's see. So first of all, the title, it's a very simple title. Remember that great, I don't know if you didn't catch the episode, was it this weekend or this week or last week? Somebody, I think it was Kim Stafford this week. Somebody asked about titles, and Kim said that he has an exercise where he asks his students to write a short title for a poem, and then a long title for a poem, and then a weird title for a poem, and in that order. And in that process, he finds that you come up with cool titles. And so it's interesting because short titles can work, but as he mentioned, short titles are often just labels. And then long titles often set the mood, and then the weird one is usually everyone's favorite. And because the title is an opportunity to add an extra layer to the poem as well. So for here, this poem the title works kind of as a label. So it could do more, but it does work. And so this function that it provides is knowing the topic. Dick Westheimer says, I like the title. And I do too. It works. It could do more, but it sets the scene. So we know what the poem is about. We don't have to question and wonder what the poem might be about by reading this title. So 3 a.m., you had no idea. You had no idea. You can hear a guitar playing. So we have the you poem, but I think it's pretty clear that it's self-talk. So I think the you is really a substitute for I, a little bit of a distance, talking to yourself. You had no idea you had no idea. You can hear a guitar playing, not beautifully, but just enough to pick out of the darkness. So I think it's a really good start. So we have the setup. We know it's 3 a.m. We know what's going on. We hear a sound. So we're getting all these sense details already. We're sort of entering the poem. It's doing a really good job of that. Elsewhere, children cheer, and you can hear youth in their bound voices like a bundle of reeds. See, this is a great line. Their bound voices like a bundle of reeds. I like that a lot. Giving off the smell of cut grass. So we're moving through some interesting details that are keeping us engaged. A little disorienting because I'm not sure at 3 a.m. the smell of cut grass and why would children be cheering? They don't really make us. So we're trying to see how these details piece together as we go, as if ears could become tongues, set free to return all the junk mail with interest. That is wrong. And so here I'm a little. This is where I start to wonder if I'm understanding the poem. It's a mess, and you try to gather it. Fail, look up and see strangers making the same movements, even the ones sitting still, as if they can't quite hear any guitars anymore. Gradually, you feel like a guest in your own room, too uncomfortable to even piss in a jar now and sleep in a snicker in the dark when you need a friend. So now the poem. So from this point on, I feel this is my feeling as I read the poem, and maybe I try to set up a light over here. The problem is always shadows. It's always a tough choice how to get this light. Maybe I need a camera with like a ring light on the camera. So sorry for the shadows. I thought I'd try it this way because it makes it clear here, but then my hand gets in the way. But so my feel reading through this poem, yeah, I'm engaged, I'm interested, I'm curious. Then I start to get lost. I think it's really with the junk mail. And James Langford says too, that is wrong took me out of the poem. And it is like so I'm feeling these details. I'm feeling the setting, as we go through. And then there's some strange details to the setting, which are sort of piquing my curiosity. I'm like wondering, why is there cut grass? Why are there children cheering? As I mentioned, I like the bound voices like a bundle of reeds. I thought that was a cool sound to those lines. As if ears could become tongues. The taste, we smell the cut grass as ears could become tongues, not even noses. So I'm not sure, that's a little strange. But the strangeness is fine. But then here, set free to return all junk mail with interest. So Dick Westheimer says the first line with the title feels like this is going to be about drowse, quasi-dream state, but this feeling dissolves in the third stanza. Yeah, that's the thing. And then Cindy Gore says, insomnia, I understand it too well. Yeah, so I feel, I feel like it goes off the track a little bit. Giving off the smell of cut green grass, as if ears could become tongues, set free to return all the junk mail with interest. That is wrong. So James Langford, or maybe Jimmy Papa says no need to tell us that. And James Langford says that is wrong, took me out of the poem. And we could cut this. I mean, it feels like one of those, false leads. And when you're reading a poem, especially when it's short and you don't have any, you only have so much time you can spend on it. If you get a false lead, it takes you in the wrong direction. It just like ruins the poem kind of. Like it says like, look over here, but then the real stuff is going on in the other direction. And it feels to me like that maybe is what's happening here. So I think you could cut this and just keep going with the poem. Why not? I still don't understand the junk mail with interest. And the interest, it takes it from like a visceral sense-based place into more of like an abstract concept, like, returning the mail with interest. But even if you do, so you read, giving off the smell of cut green grass as if ears could become tongues, set free to return all the junk mail with interest. It's a mess and you try to gather it. See, that's much better than that is wrong. Just jumping, just continuing with the string. It's a mess and you try to gather it, fail, look up and see strangers making the same movements. So is this just like a dream state, like we're half asleep? Is that what's going on in the poem? I don't know. Even the ones sitting still, as if they can't quite hear any guitars anymore. Is there like a movie on because we have insomnia? I don't know. So this is a poem where I enter it, I feel like I'm connected, and then it just loses me. And so the takeaway is like clarity here. It just loses its sense of clarity. Like we have the setting, but then we lose our sense of what's actually going on. So I'll see if anybody else has any thoughts about this. Let me know. even when sitting still, as if they can't quite hear any guitars anymore. Gradually, you feel like a guest in your own room. I like that line, I should point out. That's a good line. A guest in your own room. I like that. Too uncomfortable to even piss in a jar now. And sleep as a snicker in the dark when you need a friend. So Deborah T says it's disorienting poem about a disoriented state. It could be, but it doesn't feel disoriented enough for that. Let's see. Oh, jeez. Okay, now I can see Facebook again. Kelly Rush says, I really like the sleep is a snicker in the dark. Lisa Allison says, I'm struggling to figure out what's at stake in this poem other than capturing the feeling of insomnia. Yeah, yeah, that too. I mean, maybe that's all we're trying to do here. Mark Gridner says, sleep is a snicker in the dark is a very interesting idea here, especially when you need a friend. About the with interest up here. Jenny Middleton says, I think it means with added extras to annoy the senders. Yeah, Nate Jacobs says, what should have been a great turn doesn't deliver. Yeah, it all comes down to this pivot point, I think, which everybody's immediately, pointed out. It doesn't feel right. So this was kind of like you took a turn one way and the poem should have taken a turn the other way. So what we need is a transition here to something different to expand the poem out. One of the metaphors we always use is that every poem needs a door. When a poem gives you a door, you got to take it. You got to enter some kind of new space. Like if you, like what we want to do, like we're trying to like raise our awareness, and to do that, you kind of have to have some kind of sense of transition. And to do that, you kind of need to go from one plane to another very often. And that's what this poem doesn't really do, I guess. It feels like this is like a door, like a turn that it wants to be, but then the poem continues in the same way it started. And maybe that's the issue. So I think this poem just feels incomplete because it took a wrong turn here. And it needs to find something different to do. Or at least maybe, take a turn somewhere else. Like what do all these things make you think of? Sort of like a brainstorming kind of thing. Like some kind of jump. Like where can we go out of any of these lines that it's somewhere else? And maybe we can come back to the insomnia later. Or maybe we can just, stay in the new place. But a poem needs to go somewhere. And this doesn't really go anywhere. It just kind of stays where you always were. Sherry Puff says, great. Oh, wait, no. Where's Sherry Puff? It jumped as I was reading the comment. Joe Bucker says, great imagery, but lacking cohesiveness. Sherry Puff says, it reminds me of Proof Rock. I have heard the eternal footmen hold my coat and snicker. Roselle Kravitz says, sleep is a snicker in the dark suggests to me that sleep is more than just elusive. And Jenny Middleton says that's what insomnia is like, though. Thoughts circle. Yeah, so if we want to just... if what we're trying to do in this poem is to capture the feeling of insomnia, then I think it doesn't do it enough. It doesn't make me actually feel like I'm in that state, which I think we've all been in that state, right? Where we're sort of can't really sleep, we're like half asleep, our thoughts are kind of meandering around, and we're just frustrated and, in the dark. And if it captured it well in like a unique way that we could sort of put a label on, or the poem could be the actual like capturing of that, like the concretizing of that feeling, then that's something. And I think that's enough for a poem to do something like that, just to capture a feeling. But it doesn't really capture it well. Like, I'm not feeling actual insomnia. Like, it's like a description of the feeling rather than like evoking the feeling in me. So if that's all we want to do, then we just have to do it better. Which is possible. I mean, but I think too, the poem wants to go somewhere else. And I think it's not capitalizing on the possibilities that it has before it. Yeah, and Lisa Adlin says, a great poem in here if the speaker can find that door. Yeah, exactly. And I hope I'm not being too abstract when I talk like that. But a lot of times what happens is a poem, the words are like rattling around in your mind as you're writing or as you're reading, and they're triggering other thoughts, you know? And it's a way to almost like an augurist or something, like reading, you know, the bird bones or droppings or whatever they would do, where like the just the shapes and the images, or just looking at clouds, you know, just having that exposure to words rattling around in your mind makes you think of other stuff, and it's really like your subconscious sort of telling you where to go with that stuff, and that's what the creativity is. So we need to to capitalize on that. And find some other way, like whatever is triggered by these thoughts and images, we have to sort of go in that direction and elaborate on that, and follow that trail where it leads. And that's the thing that's kind of missing in this poem. As Sharon Fronte says, Andrew is cool. I like his work. It has great images. And yes, I do want more. Yeah, so the writing is really good. I don't want to take away from that. Like the images are great. There's a great pacing. There's a lot of really good lines. So I'm enjoying the poem on like a sort of a line by line level. It's just what the poem is adding up to and sort of the where it's going. Let's see. Lisa Adelson says, I love that this is in the second person. Great way to portray the dissonance and dream quality. I agree too. This is a perfect use of the second person. Like a lot of times it gets a lot of, because a lot of times it's used in a way that's just confusing. But there's certain times where it's the perfect way to go, and this is it. So Jenny Middleton says perhaps the tense change that implies a shift in the narrator's self-awareness could be developed. Let's see. You had no idea you can hear. So we're first person. I kind of didn't notice the tense. It's a mess, and you try to gather it. Fail. You look up and see strangers making movements as if they can't quite hear any guitars. You feel like a guest in your dorm room, too uncomfortable to even piss in a jar, and you sleep. So we're all in the. So I guess Jenny Middleton says maybe we could change the tense. Are the first two lines? Oh, I think that you had no idea. I don't think that's a tense change. I think this is all speech. So I think this is all like a self-monologue in the present tense. And so the person, this is like what the speaker's thinking about. So I'm like telling myself, you had no idea. You had no idea. That was my interpretation anyway. Anyway, I think that's about it. We just need to look for some kind of avenue for this poem to go down that's surprising. Jimmy Papa says that guest in your own room line will stick with me. Excellent. It is a great line. There's several really good lines here. And James Lancaster says, sleep is a snicker in the dark is very nice. Keep writing like that. Deborah T says, like, sleep is mocking the person. And let's see. And Jimmy Papa says about the snicker in the dark line. I agree, James. I wonder if it... Oh, wait, no. Oh, Deborah T, sleep is like... It's like sleep is mocking the person. And that's what the snicker is in the dark. Yeah, that's really good. So there are really good things here in this poem. I just expand and go somewhere surprising. Let's look at the other one while we have time. Again, this is Andrew Sano, another similarly length poem. In the beginning, they tried everything, evoking birds and repeating the names of favorite trees while ransacking adjectives for moisture and heat. A few turned over dead leaves from some past year's fall, as if they could decipher peril, while the band played gaily on without a drummer in sight. But it's the natives now who worry about restless things and fear. Without a pith helmet, stalks the wire. Many tried grandmothers and walks around the block to the park. Alone, at last, yet far from happy, about how things had turned, not necessarily out or in, but without a compass, map, or tiller did it matter. A new world, unsought, sat before them, erasing the shape of the days and burning bare ghostly sketches on tingling nerves of what was to come. So this poem, let's see in the beginning. I really like the beginning again. I felt like I was a little, it was trippy reading it in little places as the poem went on. Maybe that was just me and I got distracted. But let's see, in the beginning, they tried everything, evoking birds and repeating the names of favorite trees while ransacking adjectives for moisture and heat. So here we have the they, and we don't know who the they is, which is a thing that leads to, our brains just want to know, like, who they is. Like, we're sort of fixated on that question when there's, like, a subject and we aren't told who it is. So right now, as I get to this part, I like the lines. I think that, there's interesting. That they tried everything, evoking birds. There's a mystery to it. Repeating the names of favorite trees. There's a nice rhythm to the syntax as well, while ransacking adjectives for moisture and heat. It's a very very just it just piques your interest, these first 4 lines. But my brain is drawn to who is that they. A few turned over dead leaves from some past year's fall, as if they could decipher peril, while the band played gaily on, without a drummer in sight. But it's the natives now who worry about restless things and fear, without a pith helmet, stalks the wire. So here's one of the things where the syntax, I just trip over the syntax here every time I read it. So, and it just changes. It's a long sentence. A few turned over dead leaves from some past year's fall, as if they could. And part of initially the turned over, it's a what would normally be a verb being used as a noun phrase, I guess. Turned over dead leaves is just one noun phrase, so that kind of throws you off because the completion of the noun phrase is on the next line. From some past year's fall, as if they could decipher peril. And again, we don't know who the they is, so we're kind of like searching for that they internally. Could decipher peril, while the band played on gaily, without a drummer in sight. But it's the natives now who worry about restless things and fear, without a pith helmet, stalks the wire. So I don't know. I guess fear like the subject of stalks? So fear stalks the wire? I don't know. I get a little lost. Yeah, and Jimmy Papa says I kind of get lost at natives and onward. And that's the thing. We kind of do. So this whole, it just goes on too far. I think right around here, it's working still, but it kind of runs on and goes in a strange direction, and I get a little lost. Jimmy Pappas also points out there's a repetition of turned later, but I don't think it connects. Yeah, the turn comes up here again too, without sort of any connection. I think that's true too. Yeah, and Sherry Pop said, "What is the subject of stocks exactly? It's supposed to be natives. If it's supposed to be natives, that's a problem in agreement." Yeah, so it's just hard to decipher just the syntax of this line. Like, what this is the verb, and what's the subject of this verb? Is it natives? In which case it would just be stalk. The natives stalk the wire, or is it fear stalks the wire? There's just ambiguity there that's hard to resolve as a reader. Many tried grandmothers, and again, who are the they? I just feel kind of lost at this point. Like I'm always willing to get lost a little bit, and I kind of love getting lost a little bit. But then when you get lost too much, you start to actually worry about being late for your appointment or something. Many tried grandmothers and walks around the block to the park, alone at last, yet afar from happy, about how things had turned. Again, we get that's that turn again. Not necessarily out or in, but without a compass, map, or tiller did it matter. And again, there should be some kind of punctuation here. So that throws off that syntax of that sentence. And I'm just a little lost. Many tried grandmothers and walks around the block to the park. So we're still talking about this day. But who tried? Who's the they? And why? And what are they trying? I don't feel like I know. Many tried grandmothers and walks around the block to the park alone at last, yet far from happy, about how things had turned. Not necessarily out or in, but without a compass, map, or tiller did it matter. A new world unsought sat before them, erasing the shape of their days and burning bare, ghostly sketches on tingling nerves of what was to come. So again, I just feel like it all goes back to this: who is the they, and what is the situation? The lines, other than the few places where it sort of gets too complicated for itself and sort of trips, there's a sort of a dance going on with all the language. And some of it's really great. Like Nate Jacobs says, I'm lost in language. Lots of phrases make me recall a variety of references, but I can't make any of it connect in a meaningful way. Needs a lot of rewrite to clarify the who's and the what's and how they play together. Exactly what I was saying here. So there's a real like dance going on with the language, and there's some really great lines, but the dance is sort of too intricate and it trips over itself sometimes. So that needs to be cleaned up. But the main thing is just this they and the situation. I mean, it feels like a riddle where we're trying to figure out who the they is and what the situation is. And a poem like a Wordle just isn't something that that's compelling in that way. Like we're not, we come to poetry not because we want to solve a puzzle, but because we want to have an experience. We want to step inside someone else's body and breath and become them for a moment and see the world from a different perspective and learn about ourselves in the process. And having a poem that functions like a riddle, where we sort of solve for X, and the X is the they. That's not the right construction. And maybe there are some people, I don't know, are there people who like poems as puzzles? Like I don't know. I mean, this is just always, I'm just going on what my experience of poetry is personally, and then what people respond to when we publish those poems. So maybe there are people that like poetry as puzzles, but I'm not sure. I don't know. But so anybody, if you like poems like that and like that experience, because I could see why it would be fun. Actually, I mean, I do the Wordle with my son every night, and it's fun trying to puzzle that out. And so if we're really just solving for the they, and that's sort of our challenge, poems in that structure, maybe that can work. But this is just a sidebar. I've kind of always wondered if anybody feels differently on that. Cindy Gore says I like mystery, and I like mystery too. It's not that. It's just the idea that the mystery should be in the meaning, should be in what the poet, the speaker, doesn't know and is learning in the process, and we sort of reveal that mystery, or we get to experience the sense of that mystery as we're reading the poem. But when the speaker or the writer knows something and is withholding it just so we have to figure it out, that's what I'm talking about as a puzzle. Because the people who make a puzzle, the people who make the Wordle, know what the word is, and our challenge is to find it. And that's not really mystery. That's something different. That's puzzle. Anyway, let's see. Let's get off that tangent, though. Dick Westheimer says, alone, happy matter, abstractions after abstractions without support. And Deborah T, it's a good point. Solvable puzzles are fun, but not solvable ones aren't fun for me. Maybe I should think of it that way. Like if we realize at the end, and it's not that much of a leap to figure out who the they is. If there's something that kind of reveals it, and it's sort of a puzzle that's solvable, then we can enjoy that. I think that's right. That's a good point, Deborah. But it's when we can't solve the puzzle, and it's just frustrating. So maybe that's a better way to think of it than the poems shouldn't be puzzles, but poems should be solvable puzzles. And this poem isn't solvable, in my opinion. Cindy Gore says, I love the last line, though, like COVID. Last line. Yeah, I should have pointed that out. I did love the last line, too. Even the whole last section, a new world unsought sat before them, erasing the shape of their days and burning bare ghostly sketches on tingling nerves of what's to come. And James Lankford says, and I went back to the title, and it didn't help me solve this. And yeah, it doesn't. So there's just listen to the grace of that line, though. Just the way that the sounds come together. It's really, really well written. A new world unsought sat before them, erasing the shape of their days. See, we could say just, you might just say erasing their days, but then adding the shape of their days just adds a lot, doesn't it? A new world unsought sat before them, erasing the shape of their days and burning bare ghostly sketches on tingling nerves of what's to come. And that's really cool. Angela Gardner says the poems I like the most feel more natural. If the mystery feels natural, then it would be good. Like a good mystery story, it's not hard to read if it flows well. Yeah, there you go. That's a good point too, Angela. Thanks. And Jimmy Papa says the words natives and pith helmet send me back to movies I watched as a boy that took place in Africa and were racist. I would get rid of both those words. That's a good point too. And that was one of those, I had this passing thought. Just the word natives is one of those words you got to be really careful with. And then a pith helmet too. What is a pith helmet exactly? I have it in my head. It's a helmet with like a spike on the top. But I don't know. That's one of those things I just, let's see, a pith helmet. Oh, a pith helmet is a safari helmet. See, so I imagined that wrong. It's that kind of here's a good example. I don't know if that screen view's up. Hang on. Where's the screen view? Sorry. That took too long. It wasn't worth it. But here's a view of the pith helmet with Melanie, Melania Trump. That's her name. Anyway, I guess this is why I was thinking of. This is more what I was thinking of. This kind of thing here. So maybe I wasn't wrong. Where's it go? This thing. I was thinking more like this, but I guess it's just any kind of like hard hat-ish kind of safari type helmet. Anyway, yeah. So I'm a little, I just want to know more of the story. I don't want things being held back. I want to be able to solve the puzzle. Sydney Bessie says that's the thing the antagonist wore in Jumanji. So a funny story. We a couple weeks ago, we decided that we have a movie night every Friday night with like a family movie, watch a kids movie, and we picked Jumanji. And then that day at school, my son won the Jumanji game, the board game, at like the class party or whatever. And so he brought home Jumanji, and we already picked Jumanji to watch. It was the weirdest coincidence. So some kind of cosmic connection. Let's see. Lisa Allison says, this is a really good point to make. Sometimes I fall in love with language too much when I'm writing and forget about the story. Yeah, I think that's the summary of this poem. Just too in love with the language so that the story is overlooked. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Okay. Oh, yeah, and so Sherry Paff 2 mentions the missing drummer seems to mean that the music is without rhythm, no beat to march to. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next poem, or poet here. So interesting stuff here. There's good writing in these poems, Andrew, but just more clarity is kind of what we need. Let's go to, the next poet is Patricia Casey. And Patricia said, I don't have it up, but she said something about, I wonder if I fit in as a writer, because I love reading poetry, but I can't seem to make poetry work or something like this. She said something to that effect. And so her question was like, can I be a poet, basically? And, we talk about this a lot, but my opinion is that everybody's a poet. And I think a lot of times we have a creativeness to us that's sort of a childlike thing, and a lot of times it gets covered up by trying too hard. I mean, I talk about this a lot, but the Zen and the Art of Archery, I think, is the best book about writing, and it's all about how I don't have the quotes to pull up, but it's all about how trying to hit your target makes you miss your target. You have to sort of exist in a space of not trying. It's a very Buddhist, it's Zen and the Art of Archery. And so you have to exist in a place of not trying. And I think that's where we get hung up. We end up trying too much. and the effort throws us off. And I think that's kind of what happens. So here is that's just my sort of general thoughts, and I haven't even read these poems yet. But usually, if you're struggling, it's because you're not freeing yourself up enough. But let's see. Flower on a river. Moonflower weeps her death tonight. Their human, sacrificial right. They'll snatch her heart that's beating still, appease their godless bloody will. Their lurid dances fill the till of fervent sorcery until climactic bloody fevered pitch enriches all who are bewitched. Moon's passioned love brews in the mix, revolting over this year's pick. With all this strength and might he'll fight Tezcatlipoca, god of night. He'll challenge smoking mirrors right to consecrate this bloody sight. For flowers moon would disengage Tezcatlipoca's haughty rage. While rivers race, a nation crazed, moon's gentle spirit is enraged. The purest sacrificial lamb distorted cultures ever damned. The moon turns red at deathly scam, their sham has reached the great I am. The mighty moon has heard her pleas, wild rivers calm the raging seas. While moon meets flower on a breeze, her captors flee against the siege. Free-falling stars do somersaults, while earthquakes mend their jilted faults. Moon's flower cascades from assaults, entombed in nature's safest vaults. Her moon is weeping joyous tears. Moonflower lives 100 years. So, so this is interesting. It's really fun to read because of all the, I think the rhyming and the meter's done really well. The first thing that you notice is that the poem is centered. And this is one of those things where I always, I wonder how much is just a simple convention. Because in the typewriter age, before we had word processing computers, it was really hard to center any poem. You would have to know the line length ahead of time and then figure out where to start it. It's just almost impossible on a typewriter or by longhand. And so the convention sets up that poems usually are usually at least justified on the left. And so we're sort of used to reading a poem that way. And so now that we can center poems, it's not the convention to do so. But at the same time, there is something about centering poems that, because there's a reason. Like, we're trained to read. Like, in addition to just the poetic convention of not centering poems, we're trained to read where our eye, when it comes to the end of a line, even if we're reading a paragraph, we know sort of where to come back to. Like, our eye sort of, and there's a quickness because we know exactly how far our eye has to dart over to read the next line. And you'll see poems where people play with the indents as a way of sort of manipulating that aspect and sort of capitalizing on it not being exactly where. It gives like a little more unsettled feeling and a little more sort of chaotic kind of feeling in a poem if there's different indents or if there's a strange pattern. We sort of like notice the pattern in the back of our minds. There's a thing that you can play with there. But when you're centering a poem, you're getting that sort of arbitrarily, just based on line length. And it doesn't have quite the same effect. And so there is a reason not to center poems other than just the convention. But there's the convention too. And so if you get a poem that's centered as a submission, you're assuming it's a poet that hasn't read a lot, frankly, because they're not following sort of the standard conventions. And that might be a detriment to just how the poem is received. So if you look at through Rattle's history, we've published like maybe, out of like 5,000 poems, maybe 10 have been centered. So I would that's one quick thing that will just help, both help readers sort of understand you're part of the club almost, and just have a little better chance of having poems published, I think, honestly. It's just to left justify them. Potter King Badger O'Donohue says, yep, left justify and no capitals on new line except for full stops. Please, thank you. So that's the thing. That's the thing that's more of an opinion Some people really prefer capitalizing each line, signifying that each line is sort of more of a unit. And I think the logic there works. It's a sort of a. Some people don't like that either. Let's see. But the real point here. So we haven't even talked about the poem yet. Just the sort of the setup. But Kelly Rush has lots of control here, not easy to do. And Jean-Andre Van Breda says good vocabulary. And yeah, they're great words and great. The use of rhythm and the use of meter are really well done here. The one thing that I would prefer, let me turn, is I think there are too many end-stopped lines, not enough enjambment, which is another thing you can play with to sort of not have it have a sort of a sing-song sort of routine. Like you want to have a, there's a great interview really early on in the Rattlecast with Jamie Hecht. And I love what he talks about. He's a formal poet, but he talks about the way that the use of meter should be to set up an expectation and then undercut that expectation. And so having certain lines being jammed when most of them are not, or a good, and sort of playing with what you expect versus what you actually get gives you an actual like neurochemical, like a dopamine and serotonin boost. That's really the brain physiology underneath learning is the dopamine and serotonin kicks we get by having our expectations subverted, which encourages us through like operant conditioning to to adjust our worldviews. But anyway, so having more enjambment would help this poem a lot. I think it gets too much into full end stopped on the rhyme, especially when a poem's rhyming. You get in this sort of like, it's coming too much and you're not sort of surprised enough just by the way the language works. So on like a line by line, like a level of how much, how the poem is working on that musical level, that's the only thing that I would say is just try to get a little more enjambment in here instead of being so repetitive. But otherwise, I thought there were great rhymes and a great sense of the language and great vocabulary. It was a really fun poem to read. Flower on a River. Let's kind of go through it. I've been babbling for a long time. Moonflower weeps her death tonight. Their human sacrificial right. They'll snatch her heart that's beating still, appease their godless bloody will. And so again, similar to the last poem, I'm having trouble following the story a little too much. Like I like the language. I really love. I love reading it. So Mark Renner says the rhyming in the flower poem is quite well done, although maybe a bit too much. Here it is not clear what the poem is actually about. This is what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly. It's in a kind of fantasy world. There's also a lot of good words, but the why is unclear. Yeah, so I think, strangely, like the last poem, the story is lost in the language. And so I feel very engaged on just the music of this poem on that kind of level. I'm really enjoying reading it out loud. But I'm still having trouble following the story at the same time as I read it. And so I need more clarity in this poem. And again, Mark Grenier too says the regularity of the rhyme and meter needs to be broken up a bit, I think, although the skill with which the rhyme and meter is done is impressive. It is. There's nothing tripped me up about the rhyme or meter. The one rhyme I didn't like, going through the tears years is a sort of a weak rhyme. There are certain rhymes that you just see so much that it's tough to continue. But I love like the scam I am. There are a lot of surprising rhymes. And there's only that one sort of, there's like sort of rhyme cliches. And there's only one that I noticed that was sort of an annoyingly cliched type rhyme. Otherwise, great choices of rhymes and just great. But anyways, let's keep reading the poem. Try to see if we can come up with a story really quick. Their lured dances fill the till. Fill the till. Like putting the rhyme there where the rhyme isn't usually. Like we have all these end stop rhymes. Having an internal rhyme there is really fun. Like that kind of thing really adds to the music. The lured dances fill the till of fervent sorcery until climactic bloody fevered pitch enriches all who are bewitched. Moon's passion, love, bruise in the mix, revolting over this year's pick. So again, this is sort of a slant rhyme, the mix and pick. So there's a lot of really nice play with that. With all his strength and might, he'll fight Tezcatlipoca. Tezcatlipoca, of god of night. And again, there's a nice the pause here. See, these are like the little things that just make this really great writing. So I think Patricia mentioned that she writes a lot of or reads a lot of poetry, and you can tell, like, you learn a sense of music by reading a lot, and definitely Patricia has that, because this pause here is so wonderful. Because that even though the night fight is sort of a simple common rhyme, there's a way that the pause there's something really satisfying about that, because of the long, hard to say word, and then the pause of the comma, and then the god of night. There's really nice music to that. He'll change smoking mirrors. See, I don't know what smoking mirrors is. He'll challenge smoking mirrors' right to consecrate this bloody sight. For flowers moon would disengage Tezcatlipoca's haughty rage. While rivers race a nation crazed, moon's gentle spirit is enraged. The purest sacrificial lamb distorted cultures ever damned. And I'm enjoying reading it, but I cannot follow the story. The moon turns red, a deathly scam. Their sham has reached the great I am. The mighty moon has heard her pleas, while rivers calm the raging seas. While moon meets flower on a breeze, her captors flee against the siege. Free falling stars do somersaults, while earthquakes mend their jilted faults. Moon's flower cascades from assaults, entombed in nature's safest vaults. Her moon is weeping joyous tears. Moonflower lives 100 years. Sherry Pop concluded this link. Thanks, Sherry, to the Britannica page on Tezcatlipoca, which is the Aztec god, god of the Great Bear constellation of the night sky, one of the major deities of the Aztec pantheon. Tezcatlipoca's cult has brought it to central Mexico by the Toltecs. It's been a little too detailed maybe to read all of it, but that's the reference. The thing that I'm thinking, like, for me, the poem just, the story just doesn't come through in the poem. I just feel kind of lost at what the story is actually being told. The thing that I would suggest reading and thinking about, okay, so Sherry Puff says apparently Smoking Mirror is a translation of that name. I get it. Okay, cool. And Paul Corbeil says, I like the religious echo that rings for me when rhyming lamb and damned. Yeah, that's a really good rhyme too. Sandy Bassey says it has a very sensual, earthy feel to it in the opening lines. Fills the till, make me think of dug up earth. It sounds like a ritual. Yeah, there's a ritualistic kind of feel to it. It feels like sort of like the telling of a great myth, you know? And you could imagine, someone, around a campfire or some kind of like, animated version of this being told or something like that. Let's see. Attractive Faye, he says, there's a great rhythm, language, and gorgeous images. I did get lost midway, but it kept my attention, probably because of the musicality. It reminded me of a nursery rhyme. Yeah, definitely. There's that sense to it, of kind of like incantation of a great myth. But I was going to say, if you want to look back at Marcella Shulak's episode not too long ago where she did translation, there was a book that she did, and she read the very last poem I think she read was a translation of poems. Was it like, what was it? Was it Polish folklore? I can't remember exactly what it was, but at the end of that podcast, there's a whole book, and she sent me the PDF of that book. So I read a few of the poems, and there's some great things told in this style, and still modern. But the thing is getting through, like actually telling the story, like the sort of storytelling, if you were a fiction writer type qualities, or what's really the only thing I think that's missing in this poem. Other than that, I would not center it on the page. But and those poems go on for pages. And they're translations, but they rhyme and are metered very similar to this. And so I would check out that book and think about, as you read those poems, just how the storytelling happens. Because I feel like we're missing the story. Otherwise, I love it. Let's see. And about the centering, Dick Westheimer says, breaks from convention need a compelling reason to earn the reader's trust. That's exactly it. Really good way to put it, Dick. And Tamara Crute says the story is Aztec mythology. I think maybe the context should be stated below the title. Yeah, I think this should be thought of more as a story where you have to tell the whole story. I think it's too short, maybe, is one of the things, too. I think we need to get this is like an epic type story. And we need to know, I mean, maybe this is just one in a series that tells the whole story, but I don't know what the Moonflower is, if that's a personified thing, or is it actually like a god or something? How literal are we being? Who's snatching? I just don't know the story itself. And I think the story is worth telling. So I would tell the story. Okay. Only 7 minutes left. I actually have to go right at the end of the hour this week. I have an appointment. So let's get to the other poem. This is Zombification. And again, we have the centering. We won't talk about it again, but the same things apply. Zombification. Zombification. Abominations along the borders of separation choke inhabitants with death of cultures, emptied of variations, fortified resistance. Grandiloquence harbor superiority inward against outsiders. Jails of oppression keep inhabitants laced with mentalities of narcissistic war against everyone but self. Poisoned, a quagmire resistant to sanctity. Tangible but utterly venomous, without generational upbringing. Xenogenesis yields the fruit of zombification. Interesting. What is xenogenesis? It's a word that I knew at one time. Is the fancied production of an organism altogether and permanently unlike the parent. That's interesting. So what would be... Would that be like the life cycle of like certain insects? Like that a cat... Well, I don't know. What would actually be an example of that? It doesn't have one. Let's see if dictionary... I think insects might do this. There's certain things that have the life cycle where it'll be like, a grub, and then its child is actually a different creature, and yet completely different. Oh, nothing has an example. Oh well, I have to learn more later. You can't learn with me live. But so this is an abecedarian poem. You see the A, B, C, D lines, and it's actually interesting having a poem this short. With lines this short being an abecedarian. Usually you see long lines because it's much easier to like land where you want to and find the right letter if you have more options with longer length. It's tougher to do with a short poem or short lines. And this is a good job of it. Like, it never feels like forced. I think the whole time, Patricia Casey definitely has a lot of skill as a writer. So definitely keep writing, Patricia. Don't discount yourself. Abominations. So this poem to me though, feels a little too, I don't know what, like prescriptive or something, or moralizing, like it feels like it had an idea that we're sharing rather than like figuring out what we really think about it. The poem, even with the title, we sort of know the poem's going to tell us that we're all zombies, or that the world's full of people who are becoming zombies, that kind of thing. Abominations along the borders of separation choke inhabitants with death of cultures, emptied of variations, fortified resistance. Grandiloquence harbors superiority inward against outsiders. So we get this sort of, just sort of telling us what's wrong. But to tell us what's wrong, you kind of already know what you're going to tell us, and that's why the poem doesn't have as much life. Grandiloquence harbor superiority and against outsiders. Jails of oppression keep inhabitants laced with mentalities of narcissistic war against everyone but self. And again, I think this is a great, a realistic and worthwhile diagnosis. But it sort of knows what it's doing already. That there's no mystery. We talked about mystery already, but no surprise for the reader, no surprise for the writer, or other way around, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, but that kind of thing, where we sort of know what the poem is going to give us, and then it gives us that. and there's no sense of the poem as a tool for understanding, because it's something we already are understanding. So it's in a way it's more rhetoric than the question is the line about Zeno meant to be about xenophobia? Yeah, that's what I imagined it, based on looking up what xenogenesis was again, which is the being different, so being completely different. And here maybe it would be fear of your children being different, which is definitely something that's going on these days. Poisoned, a quagmire, resistant to sanctity, tangible but utterly vehement, without generational upbringing. Xenogenesis yields the fruit of zombification. So this is definitely an interesting ending and an interesting question. Like, there's a concept here that I think is worth exploring. It feels like there's something really there, but the poem it doesn't explore it. And so again, we got to go back to what I was talking about before, where what's missing a lot of times is a sense of letting yourself go and surprising yourself and not being tied to the target you're aiming at. I'm just going back to that Zen and the Art of Archery. The creativity comes from chaos, and there's not enough chaos sometimes. And that kind of feels like the missing element is just the chaos. There's a yin yang. Another way to think of it is that there's sort of order and chaos, and there's plenty of order in these poems, and the order is working really well, but not enough chaos. And that's the only thing that's missing, is sort of letting yourself go, and being able to surprise yourself, and I don't know. So we want to explore these things. Explore and expand on this idea. I think this is maybe a separate poem. This idea of xenogenesis being the source of the zombification. I think that's a cool concept that's interesting and worth a poem. But what's cool about it is that we can't really quite articulate how that works. And so the poem would be figuring out like how it works and exploring the ways that like what truth is there in that idea. So anyway, I do have to go, but really great writing, Patricia. I really enjoyed reading these, and definitely, let's see, are there any other comments I want to read before we go? Because I do have to get going. Mark Grenier says, how does the title inform the poem? And that's something I did want to point out too, because the poem, the title is just the last line, and again, we're sort of setting up to go where we expect it to go. It's another example of why the poem's doing that. Like, it's not going off in a new direction. Again, like the find a door discussion for the first poet. It's not taking any doors. It's not looking for doors. It's like, I'm going to express this thing about the zombification. And so the title is Zombification, and then it just ends up right where the title was. And it didn't really go, it's not like a plane that like took off and flew around and landed at the same airport, but we got this experience of being on the plane and seeing the world from a different space. We were always at the airport. And so it's got to like take a door and go somewhere else and let the subconscious take over a little bit and don't be so conscious. And that is the essence of what I'd like to pass along for these poems. Let's see. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm going to have to get going. So so that is your critique. And again, it was Patricia Casey. Really well-written poems. Free yourself up a little bit is the general gist. And then we have Andrew Sano with 2 also well-written poems. But here, clarity, like tell us, let us in on your secrets. Like show us the mystery, unlock the puzzle by the end. Those are the general gist of these poems. So thanks to both these poets for sharing these. It's always fun. I love doing this. This week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Elizabeth Johnston Ambrose. And you know her, of course, if you're a subscriber, because you've gotten her chapbook, Imago Dei, from with the spring issue, a book about her upbringing, sort of becoming an adult in a religious household. It's kind of the concept of that book. What it's about her relationship with her father is very strong, a very strong aspect of that book. She has another chapbook that was just published, and she has a manuscript that's forthcoming too, so we'll be reading some other poems, but we'll be focusing on Imago Dei. That's Rattlecast from 138. The prompt for this week was to write a poem about food or drink. So have food or drink the topic, very open-ended, but write about some kind of food or drink. And that will be the prompt for this week. If you'd like to share a poem on the open lines, Rattlecast number 138, the usual time, Sunday, April 3rd, 9 a.m. or noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.